Yeah, so AQA Sociology paper 3 is on Friday the 13th, and my favourite way to revise is by like watching a video, taking notes while watching the video, so you've got that like dual sensory learning. And then after that, going over the notes, making a nice little colourful mind map, and then some flashcards and stuff. But it all starts with a video. And I've been using Ellie Stories, but I thought for the last paper I might as well try and make my own, because someone needs to give Homegirl a day off. Bless her. She's actually dragging us all through this A level. So it definitely isn't as in depth as, it's not like a full run over, but it's like the key points, and they're like, if you're worried, as long as you know this, you will be fine. That's the kind of thing. So the first essay that they could throw at you is functionalism. And these guys think that crime is inevitable in society, and that poor socialisation leads to a lack of norms and values, which then damages social solidarity, and then in turn makes crime. They also believe in boundary maintenance, which is Durkheim's idea that if you see someone being punished for a crime that you were thinking about committing, then you're probably not gonna do it. You know what I mean? It also helps with adaptation and social change, like, for example, equality. Like, obviously, it was a crime, I don't know, to be like gay or for women to vote and stuff like that. And crimes that women and gay people committed led to the laws being changed. So it's like it can be progressive. So the first sociologist that I'm going to go through here is Cohen. So he is the guy who came up with status frustration, about working class boys who can't succeed in middle class like environments. So what they do instead is they create other subcultures that they can rise in their own hierarchy, which explains why people commit non-utilitarian crimes like, I don't know, vandalism and stuff like that, because it's just a way of retrieving status. A good way to put some AO3 into this in your exam is to say that Chloe and Owen agree with it. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but better it out, you know what I'm saying? But a good way to evaluate that with your AO3 is to say that Chloe and Owen agree with it, because they developed the status frustration by suggesting that there's three types of subculture. So you've got criminal, which is like an apprenticeship for like young criminals who want to climb the criminal hierarchy. Your best example of this is drug dealers, and that can link to local crime, because obviously the criminal, like your local drug dealer, Dave, you know what I'm saying? He don't grow cocaine in his back garden, does he? So he's got to get it from somewhere else, and that's the hierarchy, and it goes back to Colombia and stuff like that. And then the other type is conflict subcultures, which these tend to exist in high populated but disorganized areas, like high populated working class areas, where you've got like your postcode wars and you like gang fights and stuff like that, and it's like your loosely organized fight clubs is what the conflict subcultures are. And then the final one is if you fail in the top two, and that's retreatist. So if you can't climb the criminal hierarchy, and if you're absolutely dog shit at fighting, then what Chloe and Owen say that you'll do is smack. They just reckon that you'll leave and you'll take a bunch of drugs because you can't faff it out, listen. But then another evaluation point for that, so an evaluation for the evaluation, just in case you're really looking for these examiner marks, is the fact that they can overlap, and more times than not, they do overlap. So, like, criminal subcultures, the whole, like, drug dealer thing, a lot of drug dealers are drug users, so then that puts them in the retreatist category at the same time, which doesn't make sense. As well as conflict subcultures, a lot of street violence is a result of intoxicity. Jesus, can't speak. So yeah. Also, like a bunch of criminal gangs, like your criminal subcultures with your like hierarchies and stuff, are on the basis of violence. So there's a lot of overlap, which is why some people think that Chloe and Owen are chatting shit. Alright, so then we've got Durkheim. He's got a lot to say. Personally, I think Durkheim needs a day off because he's chatting, you know what I'm saying? He reckons that crime's inevitable because poor socialisation in some families means that not every child is taught the same norms and values, and some of them happen to become criminal, which is implying that the inevitability of crime stems from the inequality that exists in society, which is a wild take for someone who thinks that inequality is fantastic. He's an interesting bloke, is Durkheim. I've got a lot to say about him and all. But yeah, back to the boundary maintenance that I was talking about earlier. This is Durkheim's concept. It's the idea that if people commit crimes and they're like shamed for it or they're punished for it, especially when it's like publicly, like historically, like hangings and stuff, it deters people away, which means that crime is good to a certain extent because it stops people from committing crime, is what Durkheim thinks. Someone who agrees that crime is good is Davies. He's got a really interesting take about families. Mate, when I say I hate this man. Nah, but what he says is like illegal sex work, but like not violent sex work, like prostitution and stuff. And like yeah, like prostitution basically. He says that that's good because it allows men to express their sexual frustration without threatening the nuclear family, which is wild to say, but you know what, whatever, Davis. And then another like functionalist point, which doesn't necessarily have a sociologist to tie with it, but you could definitely tie somebody into this if you thought about it for long enough, but I didn't because I chucked this PowerPoint together. They reckon that adaptation and change is a major deal, like I was saying earlier, with the whole idea of like protests and stuff and illegal pushes back against the government and it leads to laws changing and stuff like that. And functionalists think that crime's a good thing because if something's criminal for a certain amount of time and people don't agree with it, they will fight back, will commit the crime, and then sometimes the laws are lifted, which is great for gay people and women. Yay! Then we've got the absolute beauty that is Merton's strain theory. If I could wrap this into any essay, trust and believe, I would give it a go, right? So Merton believes that states that crime is caused by the fact that people struggle to reach the American dream. So you sold the American dream, and if you can't get it through legitimate means like working and stuff, which is extremely difficult, that you've got 5 different responses to it. Before I get into the responses, this is a really good one to evaluate, like get your AO3 marks with Marxism, because Merton says that people do try to get to the American dream through illegitimate means. But then if you talk about Marxism, you could say that instead of it being the individual's fault for trying to reach a dream that's a dream that they can't attain, you should say that Marxists will believe that the dream is unattainable for certain people because not everyone is put into a situation at birth that allows them to reach that. So the bourgeoisie have a really easy time doing it, and the proletariats are fighting for their lives as per usual. So the first type is the first reaction is conformism, which is accepting the goals and the legitimate means. So you want the American dream and you're willing to work for it. Then there's innovation, which you like the dreams, but you use illegitimate means to achieve them. So that's like you like the dreams, but you might like rob people to get money. I don't know. Then ritualism, that's when you reject the goals, but you conform to the means. So you're not really that bothered about the American dream, you're not bothered about the white picket fence and the big family and shit like that. You're just working and you I don't know, you just, it's quite a sad one that really when you think about it. Then you've got retreatism, which is rejects both the goals and the American dream and subscribe to illegitimate means. So that's like the same retreatism as Claude and Owen, really. You can link that together. And then the final one's rebellion, where you replace the goals and means with different ones. So like activists and stuff. Yeah. Okay, so the next section is interactionalism. This is a different theoretical perspective. So these guys focus on if crime is socially constructed, and the idea that crime is only crime because we say it is. So the first guy that I'm going to talk about is Becker. He believes that the social construction of crime is a major deal because a deviant is only someone criminal if the label has been successfully applied, which is interesting because that's like saying that somebody isn't criminal until they've been caught. You know what I mean? You can be deviant and you can be doing deviant things, but then if that label hasn't been put upon you, then no one views you as criminal. So is criminality socially constructed, is what he's saying, basically. He also says that that's basically futile because we're labelled on everything. So why should criminal be another label that we put value on? Cicero argues that officer typifications of the typical criminal lead to them to concentrate on people who are more likely to offend, like how police like patrol working class areas and stuff. So that's basically saying that labels that middle class society put on a criminal most of the time align with working class people, which makes them more likely to be criminalised than protected by the criminal justice system. Then you've got Brainwave. He distinguishes different types of shaming. So you've got regenerative shaming, which is when criminals are labelled criminal and then they're put into something that strengthens the social bonds. So, for example, like rehab. So the initial thing is you're a drug addict, you're doing something wrong, we don't like this is illegal. And then they'll put you in rehab and then they'll sort you out, kind of thing. Or you've got disintegrative shaming, which is punishment that isolates the individual and causes secondary deviance. So that's the idea that you've labelled them criminal, you've isolated them from society, and now they feel like, well, what's the point? I'll just commit the crime again. A good example of this is if you've been put in jail and you've been given a life sentence, you're less likely to abide to prison rules because you understand that there is no way that you're ever getting out. So what's the point? That kind of thing. So Durkheim believes that suicide is classified as a deviant act, right? With his study of suicide. And a good AO3 point here is Douglas. So he rejects the use of official statistics when examining suicide because the labelling of the death as deviant or suicide depends on other people rather than the actual victim. So statistics can't really tell us anything about the meaning behind the individual's decision to commit suicide, and it's all decided by somebody else. So it's all perspective, which then leads to the belief that deviance is a social construction, because if that's how we label suicide, there's no concrete, obviously examining notes and stuff like that, like a suicide note, then that'd give you the proof, but statistics tell us nothing because that's just where deaths are ruled. You know what I mean? For example, some people don't think that Alan Turing committed suicide. They think that either the government tried to kill him off because he was gay and knew a lot of state secrets, or it was an accident when he was doing some sciencey shit like he did. And then some people have, but his death was labelled a suicide because he ate the cyanide from that apple. So it's all a case of, can you really believe people who the actual deviants? And suicide's a really difficult one to wrap your head around there because obviously the person who committed the quote-unquote deviance, right? I'm not calling it a deviance, but the quote-unquote deviance aren't alive to, like, confirm it. Then finally, you've got lmao, who distinguishes between the two types of deviance. So that's primary deviance and secondary deviance. Your primary deviance are the deviant acts that have not been publicly labelled as criminal, so people just do it without many consequences, really. And then the secondary deviance is the deviant acts in individuals that are labelled. So this leads to master status, right? And my teacher, personally, when teaching us this, had a PowerPoint and it had like, has an OBE, really good at some sort of fucking hockey or something, I can't remember. And it was like a list of all these labels applied to this guy, right? And then paedophile, because that's all we remember Jimmy Savile for, innit? He had like an OBE, he was a TV presenter and stuff, but because he was a deviant and because he was a paedophile, that's the only thing that we actually like associate him with. Rightly so. Massive bell end. But yeah, secondary deviance is the how the deviance changes once it's been labelled. And there's a good example for you. Fucking Jimmy Savile with his master status of paedophile. Right, now we're moving on to class, power and crime. I'm sorry, this is so shit. Right, moving on to class, power and crime. So this is mainly the Marxist view, because they believe that crime is inevitable in a capitalist society because it encourages poverty, competition and greed. Although all classes commit crime, the working class are largely criminalised for their actions because the ruling class control the state and can make and enforce laws in their own interests. In this instance, white-collar and corporate crimes are often ignored. So the first major point is criminogenic capitalism. So this is the idea that Marxists think that capitalism is criminogenic by its nature. So it basically says that capitalism causes crime, because like people are sold adverts for products that they can't afford. Society gives us anxieties, and capitalism suggests solutions that we also can't afford. And then like alienation of the proletariat that leads to criminal deviance, stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? The next point is state and lawmaking, right? So you've got two key socialists for this. Socialists? Sociologists, that's it. For this. So Chambliss says that laws to protect private property are the cornerstone of capitalist economy. So they've got a big emphasis on protecting those rich people and those rich people's gaffes. And then to build on that, Snyder argues that the state is reluctant to pass laws that regulate the activities of business or threaten their profitability, which basically means that capitalists will make less laws that criminalise rich people because they don't want to like damage the businesses and stuff, which then villainises the working class more, which you can also compare with Cicero's point later on, but I'll point that out when we get there. So then another part of this is selective enforcement, which is the Marxist belief that all classes commit crime, but when it comes to the application of the law, the criminal justice system is selective in who it likes to protect. My dog is going mad right now. So this also links to the villainisation and the criminalisation of the working class. And it's also why some working class people think that police officers do more to victimise them, to villainise them, than to protect them, which is why there's less reported crimes in like working class victims, because they don't think that the law can do anything to help them. Then we've got the ideological functions of the criminal justice system. Pierce, who's also a Marxist, likes to say that the whole like laws and justice system and stuff like that is just a way that capitalism can have a caring face. So working class people believe that they're being looked after, when in actuality, the bourgeoisie don't give a fuck. They don't care. Then a Marxist way of evaluating this, so your AO3 point, can be from Taylor et al., who's a neo-Marxist who disagrees with the notion that, like, he reckons that capitalists, not capitalists, he reckons that Marxists are too deterministic in the way that they say it, and there's too much focus on economics and the way that people are controlled, because Taylor he puts more emphasis on the fact that it's a person's choice to commit crime, in the way that, like, Marxists say, oh, this is happening in the system, so people are having to respond like this. Whereas Taylor's like, these things are happening in the system, so people consciously choose to commit crime as an act of rebellion, if you know what I mean. Then there's some other things that he focuses on that bottom line, but I'll be dead set honest with you, PowerPoint has made it really difficult for me to read that because it's fucking tiny, so I ain't got a clue. We're all fighting for this A-level already. Then we've got white collar and corporate crime, which kind of links with the last one, but it's a little more specific to the crimes of the bourgeoisie and the white collar jobs. The ivory tower, if you will. So the first stance on this is from Ryan and Leighton, who say that crime committed by higher class people is less likely to be treated as an offence. Because there's higher rates of prosecutions for, like, street crimes that typically more poor people commit, and that crimes by the higher class are more likely to get a forgiving view from the justice system because there is a clear, I don't know, preference towards them. There's a essentially, they like rich people and they don't like us. And then further, I don't know why I've not fucking made that bold, but Tombs over here, right? I've got highlighted now. Look at that. Check me out. Well taken. Sorry. Tombs notes that corporate crime has an enormous cost, physical, environmental, and, like, economically. But it's still not treated as commonly as street crime, which has less costs. So then you've got the explanations of white collar crime. Box argues that if a company can't achieve its goal of maximising profit by legal means, it may employ illegal ones instead. So that's like the business version of Merton's strain theory, which you could probably link that in somehow if you needed an AO3 point and you were desperate. Then you've got differential association, which is Sutherland, who sees criminal behaviour as something that's learned from others. So if you grow up around criminals, or if you grow up around people who are more likely to, like, criticise the justice system, you're more likely to become criminal, if you know what I mean. And then here's that Cicero point that I was talking about from earlier, with the argument that typically working class people are more likely to have their actions labelled as criminal, and the middle class are able to negotiate non-criminal labels for their misbehaviour. So that's that. Another thing that hasn't really got a sociologist tied to it, but it's still a good point to make if you want to put it in there, is the invisibility of corporate crime, because the media won't focus on it, because obviously the media is controlled by the rich people that might be committing the crimes. The lack of political, like, involvement, again, rich people less likely to point fingers at their own. Crime's really complex, so law enforcers are usually understaffed, under-resourced, and lack technical experience. Delabeling. Corporate crime is consistently filtered out from the process of criminalisation, so they can just avoid the labels, basically. And then sometimes it's underreported because people might not be aware that they've been victimised by that. So it's like sometimes people have the grounds to sue a company because they've done them wrong, and they won't because they don't know that they have that right. So now we've got to the realist perspectives. So obviously we've got right realists and left realists. Annoyingly enough, I've put the right realists on the left and the left realists on the right, and I'm only realising that now, but you know, we move. Right realists see crime as a real problem for society. They see it as a cause of partly biological and partly social factors. Because causes can't be easily changed, they focus on deterring offenders. So these are like the hard-hitting, let's reinforce the law, let's make sure everyone's scared to commit a crime type of thing. So these guys aren't nice. It's like a stray away from rehabilitation and more just like blaming criminals instead of trying to understand why they commit the crimes. So one idea is zero tolerance policing. So undesirable behaviour should have prosecution, no matter what it is. They don't like letting people off, because if you let off, then that gives you the idea that you could possibly do it again, if you know what I mean. So they tend to just like get it out of the way. They're like, yeah, stuff it. You're getting told off and you're not going to get away with it, because then you won't do it again. Then you've got broken window theory, which is Wilson and Kelling. These guys say that it's essential to maintain orderly characteristics of neighbourhoods and reduce any signs of crime immediately. So if you see like vandalism on the streets, they'll be washing it off. If you see a broken window in a shop, they'll be fixing it immediately, because it's that idea that if you see that someone else has done it and it's not been fixed yet, you're like, oh, well, no one cares. Guess I'll do it too. So a really good one for that, a crime example is vandalism. It might be one of the only examples, now I'm saying it out loud, but you know, whatever. Then you've got target hardening, which is if you make it harder to commit crime, this will reduce the rewards and act as a deterrent. So that's the idea of risk and reward. In criminals, they have to weigh up the risk and the reward, and if the reward is higher than the risk, then they'll commit it, and if the risk is higher than the reward, then they'll bugger off. Which links to surveillance, which I'll get onto later. But yeah, that's just the idea that right realists reckon that we should make it as undesirable as possible for a criminal to come and victimise you. But that also puts the responsibility on the possible victim, and it puts blame on previous victims, because it's like, well, why didn't you protect yourself more? Which is why people don't like right realists. Don't like the right in general. Then you've got the left realists that believe crime is caused by relative deprivation, subcultures, and marginalisation, and their solution stems from reducing social inequality. So they want to find the actual reason why they got into crime, the reason why they started committing crimes, and the reason why they continue to commit crimes, and then from there find ways to make their lives a better quality so that they don't have to commit crime. So the first one's policing and control. Policing must be made accountable to local communities. They need to improve their relationship with such communities by spending more time investigating crime and involving the community in making the policing policy. So that's just the idea of getting like everyone in the community involved, hearing people's opinions and actually listening to them and stuff like that. Which also would decrease the amount of working class people who believe they're more likely to be villainised than understandably victimised. You know what I mean? Like, that whole idea that some people won't go to the police because it's just like that idea that people from working class areas are less likely to report a crime because they think that the police's trust is not worth having, because the subconscious bias towards rich people means that they'd more likely be left villainised than protected. Then we've got tackling structural causes of crime, which is just the idea that we need to reduce inequality of opportunity, decriminalisation, and provide jobs for everybody. So that's just like making people's lives, like making a better standard of living, so then people feel less inclined to commit crime because they don't feel like they need to anymore. Then we've got gender and crime. So this is getting to gender, ethnicity, and social class kind of deal. Gender and crime. Official statistics show that men commit more crime than women. However, sociologists disagree on the reasons why. Some sociologists argue that the criminal justice system treats women more leniently through ideas such as the chivalry thesis, which is Pollack. However, some sociologists believe that they are socialised, meaning in a certain way that means that they've got less opportunity to commit crime, or less need to, or less want to. But men, the idea of masculinity kind of aligns with some criminal factors, like the idea of being like violent means you're hard as nails, and then men are like, yeah, bit of me that. So the first little section I've got here is why men commit more crime than women. So masculinity. I'm not even going to try to say that name right, but it's in bold. It's this one here. Hang on, I'm highlighting it. My little. Oh yeah, there we go. Proper good at techie shit, mate. I think I've just scribbled over it. Oh well, whatever. You get the point. Messerschmitt, I don't know, argues that masculinity is an accomplishment that men constantly work at constructing and presenting to others. This is referred to hegemonic masculinity, which is the dominant and prestigious form men wish to accomplish. Therefore, Messerschmitt sees crime and deviance as a resource that different men may use to accomplish masculinity. So, like I said before, the idea that violence, being hard as nails, being like street smart, brainy, stuff like that, all links in with criminality. So, an easy way for a man to get masculine validation, some see it as just being criminal, and that kind of goes hand in hand for some people. Then another argument is globalization. I use Winlow for this. He argues that globalization has led to a decline in traditional manual jobs, which many working class males could express their masculinity through. However, there's been an increase in the nighttime leisure economy, which has provided a combination of legal employment and criminal opportunities to express masculinity. So that's like, you know, like how bouncers are usually men that are stood there crossing their arms and either being like creepily flirty with definitely underage girls in town, or like, I don't know, just chatting with each other. And then as soon as like a criminal act happens, they bounce on it and then they just like walk away right smug because they've sorted something out, and then they'll be telling the story for the rest of the night. That's the kind of thing that Winlow is talking about there. Shout out to the bouncers in my town. I didn't mean for that to sound so bitchy. Anyway, then we've got why women are committing crime. That's my next little section. Moving on from Winlow. So the first idea, like I said before, is the chivalry thesis, which is Pollack, which means that men have a more protective attitudes towards women and are therefore more lenient. So women, because of how society is structured, are more likely to be protected by men in a certain way. When it comes to like, they're more likely to be let off by men, not protected, that's the wrong word. They're more likely to be let off by men in courts because I don't know, you can bat your eyelashes and shit, you know what I'm saying? It's like when women, this is me giving some really shit examples, but I'm hoping that it makes it make sense. It's like if a woman speeds on a 30 road at 50, absolutely bolts down it, gets pulled over. The police officer's like, "Did you know that you were speeding?" And the woman goes, "Oh no, I'm really sorry. I didn't realise. I thought that the speed limit was something else." Like batting your eyelashes through window and shit, and then you get away with it. I've seen it happen with my own eyeballs. My mum can't drive at legal measures. Just ended up with a sodding stutter then, but it is a thing. 100%, it is definitely a thing. The chivalry thesis is a thing. But then you've also got the liberation thesis, which is Adler, which believes women are now becoming much more equal in society with men. Therefore, they now commit more crime. So equality is universal. So we can vote now, and we can also, I don't know, deal drugs. Then you've got class and gender deals. So you've got Carlin, who suggests that women have two deals: the class deal and the gender deal. The class deal is the idea that if they work hard, they'll be financially rewarded in life, and the gender deal is that if they're a good mother and wife, they'll be treated well. And Carlin believes that when both ideals break down, women can turn to crime. Then on the flip side, you've got why women commit less crime than men. So you've got patriarchal control theory, which is Heinsohn, who argues women have at least one male figure in their life who does not want them to commit crime. So that's a little theoretical perspective. But that also puts emphasis on the fact that women give a fuck about men's opinions. Like there's a lot of them out there that could not care less. Like me. I'm kidding. I'm not out there committing crimes and such. I'm sedated. Then you've got the functional sex role theory, which is Parsons. He argues that due to biology and the way that they're socialised, women have a nurturing nature. That's cute. And therefore incapable of or don't want to commit crime because women are too preoccupied with being a mother. I'd love to wake up and be so able to be as blissfully ignorant as Parsons, because that I don't think he's ever been outside personally. I don't think he's ever breached his front door, but I mean he's dead now, but air it out. Anyway. Then we've got ethnicity and crime. So the little intro bit that I wrote here says that official statistics highlight that black people are more likely to be stopped, arrested and imprisoned. Some sociologists argue that's because they're more likely to offend due to poor educational achievement, dysfunctional family structure and racist stereotypes portrayed in the media. However, some sociologists say that they merely appear more criminal due to the discrimination in wider society. So there's a good statistic to have in your head that I didn't write out for some reason, but I'm going to now. Is there is, I think it's 3.7 of the English, like the UK population. This is diabolical, but 3.7% of the actual population is black, right? And then the prison population, I think, is 12%. So that's just under 4 times more than it should be in like reference to proportion. So they're disproportionately populating prisons, which can be argued because police officers really do love to be racist. Yeah, pretty shit that. So there's two takes on this, why black people are more criminal and why black people appear more criminal. So starting with why black people are more criminal. Education. Black Caribbean pupils are statistically perform poorly in education and therefore may find it hard to find legitimate and sufficiently well-paid job. Definitely said that wrong, but you get the gist. And in turn, they may either turn to illegal means of employment, such as the drug trade, or turn to crime due to relative deprivation. So that could link to Merton's strain theory, if you wanted to get a name in there, just to, I don't know, solidify your answer. Then you've got family. Functionalists say that the growing rate of lone parent family structure with the black economy leads to inadequate socialisation. Therefore, children are not taught the correct norms and values in society, and in this instance, they are not taught that crime is moral. If you want a name to link to that one, I'd probably say Murray from New Right, because he just loves to shit on single mums. So, fuck that guy. Then you got the media, which is media representations reinforce the stereotype that black people are more criminal. This may lead to self-fulfilling prophecy, and black people will turn to commit more crime, which is Becca. So I should have probably wrote those names in there, but I didn't, so I've said them out loud. If you're skipping through the video, you're just getting none of that. You know what I'm saying? Then you've got why black people are more criminal. Why black people appear more criminal. So Lee and Young say that the difference in statistics are a result of black people being discriminated in wider society Utilitarian crime is a response to a material deprivation, and non-utilitarian crime is due to their frustration towards society. They believe that police racism is not the main cause of this because 90% of crimes are reported by the public. Gilroy, BME don't commit more crime than others, is his take. It's a result of the racist policing who act on stereotypes. Also, BME often come from former colonies where they've resisted oppression. However, when they resisted racism in Britain, it was criminalised. Then we've got Hall et al. In the 1970s, there was a moral panic about black people and mugging. This was because capitalism was in crisis and they used the story to cover it up. Thus, black people were more criminal, weren't more criminal, but a mere victim of capitalism. However, this made black people more unlikely to get jobs and then turn to crime. So Hall et al., just to point out the obvious here, is a Marxist, obviously. That whole moral panic thing is like a folk devil from that whole study. If you do media, then you'll know that. If not, it's also referred to as a folk devil, so that's some terminology that you can use. I would recommend having a gander at ethnicity before the exam because it hasn't really shown up anywhere else, as well as Marxism actually while we're there. So remember Hall and his pals et al. So that's one. Obviously, I ain't got a clue what's coming up because I'm literally an 18-year-old student who's cramming revision and posting it on YouTube. But if I had to guess, I'd say that there's a chance that it might come up. Then we've got media and crime. Again, if you've done the media topic, this is probably going to be way more easy for you. If not, it's fine. Here's your basics. So this is the idea that the media give an overly distorted image of crime, for instance, by overrepresenting violent crimes. This is because the news is a social construction based on news values that explain the media's interest in crime. Some sociologists see media as a cause of crime, though. Imitation and deviance amplification of moral panics. Another way, so obviously this is talking about the news and stuff, but another point just to put in there, if I haven't wrote it down, I'm not entirely sure if I have, but we'll find a way. The idea that TV shows, when representing sex crimes, normally portray it in the way that it's like a random stranger on the street just grabs you, drags you away, kidnaps you, and then commits sex crimes. But most sex crimes are actually in the home from people that you know. And then also the media, like TV shows again, like your criminal TV shows and stuff, like your investigation, like your Brooklyn Nine-Nine, that kind of stuff. The criminal always gets found, and it's a very optimistic look on crime, which gives people false hope in the criminal justice system. But onto the stuff that I've actually wrote about. The media is a cause of crime. So imitation, the media provides a deviant role models which results in copying their behaviour. You can talk about Bandura's Bobo doll theory there. If you do psychology, you'll also know that. That's basically Bandura gave a bunch of Bobo dolls to some toddlers and went, here, have a go at these, and they were like hugging him and that. And then they got told to watch an adult fight the Bobo doll. And then when they were all reintroduced to the Bobo doll, they all also started beating the shit out of the Bobo dolls. That's a very basic explanation of Bandura's Bobo doll experiment, but you can look it up. I mean, if my explanation doesn't suffice, you can look it up. Then you've got arousal, viewing violent or sexual imagery, desensitization, repeated viewing of violence, transmission of knowledge of criminal techniques, stimulating desires for unaffordable goods through advertising, and the glamorization of offending, romanticization, if you will. Then you've got the distorted image of crime, overrepresentation of sexual and violent crime, exaggerates police success, exaggerates the risk of victimisation, and the overplay of extraordinary crimes. That is basically what I was saying earlier. I have written it down, which is fantastic. Yay me. So yeah, the fictional representation of crime, you've got Surrett, They say that fictional representations of crime follow the law of opposites, meaning that they're opposite to official statistics. So property crime is underrepresented, while violence, sex, and drug crimes are overrepresented. Fictional sex crimes are caused by psychopathic strangers, whereas most sex crimes are committed by acquaintances. Fictional villains are higher status middle-aged white males, and fictional police usually catch the criminals. So that's everything that I just said, the distorted image of crime and everything, that's all Surrey. Then we've got moral panics. Cohen, which was mods and rockers. So in the 60s, there was a big Brighton fight between mods and rockers, which are basically two music genres. And Cohen examined the media's response to the disturbances between working class teenagers, and it revealed that although disorder was relatively minor, the media amplified and exaggerated this, producing a deviance amplification spiral, which resulted from an exaggeration and distortion, prediction, symbolism, symbolization, and the media caused more panics nowadays with issues like acid attacks and terrorism. So that's how it's like, I don't know, become more modern. Like everyone's panicking about some geezer on the street flooding you with a bit of acid, or going to a gig, someone's there with a bomb. So, but the point that Cohen's making is that media tends to dramatise things to make things interesting for consumers. So they'll predict what's going to happen next with little to no evidence. They will over-exaggerate things that have actually happened, and they'll make subcultures into symbols of deviance, like the mods and rockers, because 9 times out of 10, if you were to talk to anyone about mod music or rock music, they would probably reference the mods and rockers. Then we've got news values, which is Cohen and Young. News is not discovered, but it's manufactured. A central feature of manufactured news is the concept of news values. These are criteria in which journalists and editors decide whether a story is newsworthy enough to make it to the news. Key values include immediacy, dramatisation, personalisation, higher status, simplification, and risk, as well as violence, which means that the most wild crimes are the ones that are more likely to be reported, which causes more panic in society. And then you've got the media, relative deprivation and crime, which is Lee and Young. Again, they say that the media presents everyone with the image of materialistic good life, which is the norm, which everyone should conform. However, this simulates the sense that relative deprivation and marginalisation felt by groups who can't afford these groups is just ignored. So if you watch a telly programme and everyone seems to be living in this big gaff and it's awesome, and nothing bad ever happens to them, and you're there like, well, shit, this isn't fantastic, is it? So yeah, that's just the media focusing on rich people once again. Now, we've got globalisation, green crime and state crime. I have something to say about globalisation. I don't think it's going to come up for a 20 marker, right? Or a 30 marker. Or any marker. I think it won't. But I'm going to revise it anyway because everyone else is panicking and that makes me panic, alright? So you've got the little intro that I wrote is globalisation has allowed transnational organised crime to flourish, for instance, for the trafficking of arms, drugs and people. We now live in a global risk society where human-made threats include large environmental damage. Green criminology adopts an ecocentric view based on harm rather than the law, and identified both primary and secondary green crimes. The state also contributes to green crime through the exploitation of health and safety laws, for example. So we've got the globalisation crime. Castells, as a result of globalisation, there is a global crime economy worth over 1 trillion per year. Trafficking of arms, women, children, body parts, cultural artefacts, nuclear materials and endangered species, smuggling, illegal immigrants, sex tourism, cybercrimes, green crimes, international terrorism, the drugs trade and smuggling of legal goods, all benefit from globalisation. And Castells points out that it is a major economy. Taylor says that globalization has created crimes at both ends of the spectrum. It's allowed transnational corporations such as manufacturing to low-wage countries, producing job insecurity, unemployment and poverty. But globalization has also created inequality, leading to the increase in crime due to resentment and material deprivation. Then we've got Glennie. He's the guy who says McMafia, that's his terminology. The organisations that emerged in Russia following the fall of communism. Glennie traces the origins of transnational organised crime to the breakup of the Soviet Union, which coincided with the deregulation of global markets. So now we have a shed load of like brands and stuff that are all over the world, but as they've as we've become more global in like selling stuff, so has crime. If you know what I mean. So like McMafia, the point is we've got loads of McDonald's like everywhere. You could go to like some remote village in, I don't know, France, never been, and you could find a Mackey's there. But you could also find a drug dealer who's getting the same drugs that, again, Dave. I'm bringing him back up again. Dave from round here, you know. They're getting the same cocaine, it's all from Colombia. You know what I'm saying? I think I'm actually losing my mind. Right, green crime. White distinguishes the types of criminology. You've got traditional and green, right? Traditional, the subject matter is defined by criminal law and therefore is not concerned with green criminology, whereas green criminology is any action that harms the physical environment, humans or non-human animals within it, right? Then they reckon it's a crime. He also distinguishes between the types of harm, which are anthropocentric, which is human-centered approach, the idea that humans have the right to use the world's resources and dominate nature. And then you've got ecocentric, which humans and nature are independent, the view of green criminologists who see both. So that's the idea that humans and nature are like equally as important, and that humans don't have a privilege just because we're human. Or they shouldn't have a privilege anyway. We definitely do have a privilege, but you know what I mean? Find my life here. Right, so South says that primary green crimes are crimes that result directly from the destruction and degradation of the Earth's resources. So that's like air pollution, deforestation, stuff like that. Then you've got secondary green crimes, which crime that grows out of the floating of rules aimed at preventing or regulating environmental disasters. So like health and safety things, like proper equipment to transport oil over water, stuff like that. Then we've got state crime, McLaughlin. He distinguishes between the types of state crime. You've got political crimes, crimes by security and police forces, economic crimes, and social and cultural crime. And I've got some examples in brackets next to those, so if you need them, have a look. Then we've got control, punishment, and victims. What I've wrote here is sociologists believe that the ability to control criminal behaviour takes several different measures. Notably, it is targeted as situational crime prevention and environmental crime prevention. In addition, surveillance is another method used to control and punish criminals. Sociologists also focus on victimisation, which positive victimology focuses on the victim proneness or precipitation, while criminal victimology emphasises structural factors such as poverty. So the first example of this is we've got surveillance. Surveillance is the monitoring of public behaviour for the purposes of crime control. In today's society, surveillance is carried out by the use of CCTV cameras, biometric scanning, and information databases. But a good thing to mention here is the panopticon, which is that jail. Don't know if you did it in your lessons, but it's a type of jail where there's a big column in the middle where guards can sit and watch criminals, but it's a one-sided like window kind of deal. So you don't know, like as a prisoner, you wouldn't know if someone was watching you, which kind of stopped people from committing in-jail crimes as much because there was a risk of being watched, if you know what I mean. Which is Foucault's idea, right? So he studied the panopticon and the panopticus is, oh fuck my life, I can't say it. You know what I mean, right? Anyway, Foucault also says there is different types of power. So you've got sovereign power, which is like the monarch, who has absolute power over people and their bodies. Control was asserted by inflicting visible punishment on the body, and this was a brutal and emotional spectacle, such as public execution. Then you've also got disciplinary power, which became dominant from the 19th century and involves a new system of discipline that seeks to govern the mind, soul, and the body, and it does through surveillance. So it's less of the public hanging, more of them just going to watch you and make sure that you're not doing anything that you shouldn't be. That kind of thing. For punishment, we've got reduction. One justification of punishment is that it prevents future crime by deterrence, which is punishing an individual that discourages them from future offending. Also, rehabilitation. Punishment can be used to reform or change offenders so they no longer offend. This can be done so through providing education and anger management courses. Also, retribution, based on the idea that offenders deserve to be punished and society is entitled to take revenge on the offender. Entirely sure why my laptop's making bigging noises at me, but you know, whatever. This is a continuation of control, punishment, and victims, by the way. So, victimology, positive victimology, you've got Mears, who argues that there are certain factors that lead to some individuals or groups being more likely to be a victim of crime. Like the homeless are more statistically vulnerable victims of crime because they don't have the resources or the power to protect themselves. He also determines that some victims provoke behaviour that would lead to their own victimisation. This can be applied through both ends of the spectrum. Middle-class victims of crime have contributed to their own victimisation by ostentatiously displaying their wealth, therefore encouraging crimes such as theft, and the working class are more likely to provide threats leading them to violent crimes against them. Then we've got critical victimology. Morby and Walkley suggest that victimisation is a form of structural powerlessness, thereby structural factors such as the patriarchy and poverty place powerless groups such as women and the poor at greater risk of victimisation. Then you've got Toombs and White, who believe a victim is a social construct. Through the criminal justice system, the state applies the label of victim to some but withholds it from others, and therefore have an ideological function of failure to label or delabeling. By concealing the true extent of victimisation and its real causes, it hides the crimes of the powerful. So that's basically saying that some people won't be labelled as victims to stop other people looking like criminals. That's basically what they say, but in simpler terms. Then I've got control and prevention on the right-hand side there, which I'll go through now. Situational crime prevention. Clark believes that SCP is a preemptive approach focused on reducing opportunities to commit crime rather than improving society or institutions. Displacement is the idea that situational crime prevention moves crime elsewhere. So you've got spatial displacement, which is moving somewhere else. So if your house is locked, criminals will move to a different house to see if it's unlocked. Temporal, which is a different time. So if you're more likely to get caught in daylight, they'll go when it's dark. Target displacement, they might just choose a different person. If criminals are looking to kidnap, they might choose a child that's not with his parents rather than one that is. Tactical, which is a different method. The example that I put here is suicide is prevented by the fact that you can only buy 2 packets of paracetamol at one time. Functional, that's just a different type of crime. If you can't, I don't know, if you can't kidnap someone, you might go rob someone's gaff. I don't know. It's probably a really bad example. If you can't kidnap someone, you might do a different violent crime because clearly there's something that you want to let off some steam somewhere. Anyway, then we've got environmental crime prevention. Again, the broken windows thesis by Wilson and Kellin already talks about this. It's also relevant here. Zero tolerance policing, again, already talked about this, but Wilson and Kellin advocate that the zero tolerance policing approach whereby police crack down and tackle any form of disorder and repair any disorderly signs of neighbourhoods. Social and community crime prevention, which shifts the emphasis from policing to potential offenders and their social constructs. The Perry Preschool Project attempted to do this with a group of young disadvantaged black children who were offered a 2-year intellectual enrichment programme that aimed to reduce criminality in the future. The longitudinal study showed that significant differences with the control group who had not undergone an enrichment programme. By 40, they had fewer lifetime arrests for crimes and were in a form of paid employment. A good thing about that whole experiment they did was obviously they got some data from it and it was comparable. A bad thing is that it took 40 years and the sampling size was actually tiny. So a lot of people just went, yeah, that's nice, that, can you do it again? And if they were to do it again, they'd probably be dead by the time that it finished. So it takes a really long while, that one. Yeah, that's why people don't really take that one as seriously. But it's still useful to use in an essay. Anyway, that is the essentials of the crime and deviance section of AQA Sociology for paper 3 on Friday. The other section of the paper is theory and methods. I might make another one of these if I can be asked, but again, can I be? Probably not. So I don't know. I might do it if I can be bothered. I will. If I can't, absolutely not. But I hope it were useful to you to some extent, and yeah, bosh. Enjoy your revision if you can. I hope your exams go well. Yeah, that's all. Bye.